Do you think that AI is going to increase inequality between developing and developed countries, or how is it going to affect services exports?
I think there's a genuine concern that for emerging markets, who by definition should be catching up with advanced economies.
Welcome to Trade Finance Talks, your go-to trade, treasury and payments podcast. Brought to you by Trade Finance Global.
Hello and welcome to Trade Finance Talks. I'm Sylvia Angeletti, Senior Reporter at Trade Finance Global, and today I'm here with John Ferguson, Head of Economist Impact, New Globalisation Practice. John, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you're joining us from Davos today, and my first question is, can you set the scene of what Davos 2026 has been like so far? What have you seen this year, and has anything surprised you?
Well, it's sunny and cold, and as an Australian, I get very scared of the cold, but that sort of describes the atmosphere. Earlier in the week, everyone was really worried, particularly the Europeans. The worry was really around Mr. Trump and Greenland and potential tariffs, which we could talk a lot about for as long as we need. By the end of the week, we're now talking on Thursday, that threat has now been the tone of Davos. A lot of concern, particularly from the Europeans. People from other parts of the world have also been watching on because they're trying to navigate. So everyone's talking about trade, which is great for us. We love trade. We've launched the Future of Trade initiative today. It depends on your context, depends on where you sit in the world as to how you think you can navigate this new trade system.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think we're going to be talking about trade a lot today, so that's a great start. The question on everyone's mind is the recent geopolitical developments, especially between long-term allies like the US and Europe, the US and Canada. And I read that there was a piece of research you published recently about fund investment. I was wondering if you could talk, first of all, for our listeners a little bit about what that is. I'm wondering, how has that affected kind of international investment flows? Used to be friends, or now maybe no longer so much friends.
We've been hearing for a while now about this concept called friend shoring, and that's in the supply chain sense. So that is basically companies around the world trying to look at who their main headquartered countries' friends are and trying to move supply chains into that area. Now, it's easier said than done. It's easy for me to say friend shoring. That has been a little bit of a trend over the last few years. Friend vesting was our most recent paper where we asked the same question of financial flows and investment flows. To summarize, just like there's been some friend shoring in supply chains, there is definitely an intention to do friend vesting. And that is where investment flows are now sort of moving away from potential foes and moving to friends or allies. And this is a real concern, I think, for everyone on the planet, because trade and financial flows move together. And if we end up in this world of only doing business with our so-called friends, we could talk about how stable those friendships are or not, we're going to end up with a fragmented world. And I just want to share a bit of research that we genuinely believe a fragmented world is a poorer world. And we did another piece of research last year where we said if this fragmentation continues by 2030, global GDP could be up to 6% smaller and 280 million jobs fewer than if we didn't have this fragmentation. So to put that 6% in context, that's basically double the size of Africa's output in terms of GDP right now. So this is a concern. Friend shoring and friend vesting, in one sense, it's understandable that investors and supply chain managers are thinking like this, but at a broad perspective, if we end up with a fragmented world, we're all going to be poorer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So pivoting slightly, but still about international trade, I heard that you launched this Future of Trade initiative today. Congratulations, by the way. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about that. And especially, I was really interested in what you identified as the three key forces that are shaping global trade.
We're so excited. We're putting a lot of work into this, and today's the launch day here in Davos. In an ideal world, we wouldn't need a trade initiative. But the global trade order, as we've become used to it, is collapsing. Economist Impact sits within the Economist Group. Since 1843, this group has been a supporter, a believer in the principle of free trade and the benefits of free trade. So we felt it upon us within Economist Impact to start a Future of Trade initiative, which is going to be a multi-year, multi-partner initiative. And the mission of that initiative is to sort of help us realize the shared benefits of an open and interconnected world. Now, that sounds very ambitious. Right now, as I said, the world is going in the wrong direction, the other direction, but that's our mission. And the other reason why we wanted to, because we do believe we're in a new chapter. You mentioned my role at the beginning. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I run a new globalisation practice at Economist Impact. And that is because we also believe we're in a new chapter for the world. So we don't necessarily think the world is experiencing de-globalisation. We think it's experiencing new globalisation because of these three factors coming together for the first time in human history. So that's shifting geopolitics, AI or industrial revolution with AI at the forefront, and climate change. Now, all those things have happened in human history before, but at least in my analysis, never at the same time. So that's why we think this really is a new chapter for the world. And in some sense, that explains the disruption and the chaos and the uncertainty, but it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to reset, to revisit, and hopefully renew a global trading system.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talk about climate change, because I feel like people think about climate change a lot and it's in the news a lot, but not in the context of something reshaping global trade. So can you tell us a bit about that, how that actually works?
Thank you so much, because honestly, even here in Davos, climate change has fallen down the agenda. But I've tried to say a couple of times, just because we're not talking about it as much doesn't mean it's not happening. Climate change is still happening to us around the world and will continue to happen. And when I think about sort of economics and trade, which is my job and what I love to do, what we expect to see and have been seeing is a greater frequency and severity of natural disasters or climate-related disasters. As that happens with floods, fire, whatever, that disrupts trade and supply chains. And unfortunately, that is going to happen more and more often. Geopolitics is understandably at the forefront of people's minds. Everyone cannot stop talking about AI, which for obvious reasons. But climate change is just slowly happening in the background, and these disasters keep happening around the world, particularly in the emerging markets. Again, if you're shipping goods, if you're transporting goods around the world, those disasters can pose a real challenge to your supply chains.
You're absolutely right. So further on the Future of Trade initiative, I saw that one of the kind of questions it's aiming to explore is how can narrow partnerships rebuild trust in a rules-based system? And I think that's really interesting, because one of the things that's making headlines about Davos this past week is obviously Mark Carney's Tuesday speech, where he kind of decries the end of international rules-based order, and he says we're at a fracture point. And I'm wondering if not even leaders of one of the world's biggest economies believes in the rules-based international order anymore. Is there any point in anyone else talking about it?
It's a great question. And just to say, everyone is talking about Mark Carney's speech and where he got a standing ovation, and that did not happen at the end of Mr. Trump's speech. But that shows the world we're in. The world's most powerful country, US, has a very different approach right now to, say, Canada and Mark Carney and the other middle powers. And if you can tell from my accent, I'm Australian, so I would put Australia in those middle powers. You're right. It's a great question. How I would respond is a world without rules is chaos. So we're not going to have a perfect world. We're not going back to the 1990s and 2000s sort of hyper-globalization, liberalization, where supply chains and trade just expanded around the world rapidly. We're not going back to that point. But also, we can't have a world without rules. So even if, unfortunately, the US is going down a different path, and I think that will be happening for a few years yet, the rest of the world is responding. And Mark Carney's speech was about the rest of the world needs to pick up its socks and get on with it. And what I'm seeing is, both at the corporate level and the national country level, people are looking for new relationships, new partnerships, and new ways of doing business. A brief example of that is the EU-Mercosur trade deal. Now, that's been negotiated for over 20 years. And I would put some of that down to Mr. Trump's approach that has now got over the line. And that's a huge benefit. It's a huge benefit to both the EU and the Mercosur countries. So this is what the rest of the world is doing. They're not sitting on their hands. They're trying to find new ways of regional partnerships, regional trade agreements, plurilateralism. So even if we don't have all of the countries believing in a rules-based order, there is a shift where some, and hopefully enough, countries are moving to a new rules-based order.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think pivoting away from the US and Europe slightly, I wanted to talk about what you've seen in the context of the rest of the world that we so often forget about, especially in terms of BRICS. I was wondering if you'd seen any developments, either geopolitical or economic, in kind of the complex web of alliances in BRICS, especially Russia, China, and kind of the global south.
The story with the BRICS that I want to share, which I think is important for everyone listening, is about the US dollar. The future of the US dollar. So there's a BRICS story, and then there's a broader story about the future of the US dollar. Now, I'm not saying I agree or approve or would advocate for this, but I can kind of understand why, if I was a BRICS country, I might be trying to move away from a dependence on the US dollar, because you're exposed. You're exposed to all sorts of things from the US. Now, I'm not saying I approve. I'm just saying I can understand while BRICS are trying to look at an alternative or alternative payment systems, or an alternative to the US dollar. Now, actually, while I can understand it, I don't think they're going to make much progress. There'll be some, but the US dollar will still be the mainstay, the main central currency of the global trading system. But I want to make a broader point for everyone else who's not in the BRICS, and everyone, particularly those in the private sector. There's a lot of discussion around de-dollarization, and even here in Davos, people are talking about de-dollarization, but I don't think that's going to make much progress because of the centrality of the US dollar. But I still think people should be preparing for not a new global reserve currency, but just a more volatile currency world because people are, at least at the margins, losing trust in the US dollar. And over time, over the years, a norm has been in times of crisis, everyone flocks to US assets and the US dollar. That norm, that trend is potentially being reversed. That in times of crisis, the US dollar goes in the other direction. So even though I don't think de-dollarization is going to make much progress, I still expect and would sort of encourage people to think about currency scenarios where there's just more volatility. So even if the US dollar is still central, because of that relative lack of trust, it's going to be a more volatile currency trading system.
Hey, enjoying the episode? Tap follow for more. Done? Let's get back to it.
In terms of de-dollarization, are you hearing people talk about it more in terms of something that will happen and we should be prepared for, or something that should happen?
It really depends, to your previous question about where you're sitting in the world. If you've been a victim of US export controls or tariffs or any other sort of actions from the US government, then you may think you need to pivot away from the US dollar. People are more concerned about, I think, here in Davos, about the attack on US norms and institutions there in the United States. Because it's not just about potential de-dollarization, it's just about losing trust in the US dollar itself, which has been beneficial. I mean, maybe not for some countries that have been challenged by the primacy of the US dollar, but for the vast majority of countries and people who trade, the US dollar has been highly beneficial. But there is a genuine concern, again, emanating out of US behavior, about an attack on the Federal Reserve. Now, if we end up with a very Trump-focused ally in the Federal Reserve there in the US, I would guess that inflation expectations will go up. That will do all sorts of things to bond markets and currency markets. And that just undermines confidence in the US dollar as a trusted global asset. So to me, that's a bigger concern that people are worried about here in Davos for global business, is we're just seeing attacks on US norms and institutions that, well, at least people like me never expected to see.
That's really interesting. Thank you. I have another question where I fear the answer will again be, it depends on where you are. One of the key themes in Davos this year is AI. Obviously, it's what everyone's talking about. What does the increase in AI adoption mean for service expert industries in emerging countries? So, for example, we've heard a lot in the past about customer support centers in India, and we're hearing that now they're being replaced by AI chatbots. Do you think that AI is going to increase inequality between developing and developed countries, or how is it going to affect services experts?
I think there's a genuine concern that for emerging markets, who by definition should be catching up with advanced economies, that if all the benefits of AI, and there could be and should be and hopefully will be many benefits of the AI revolution, there's a concern that all gets concentrated in, say, the West, in, say, the US, and, say, a small number of big companies. That is a genuine concern. We've been talking a lot about emerging markets today at our Future of Trade launch, and there's some optimism that they are really focused on talent centers. There's a lot of talent out there in emerging markets. There's talk of global capability centers. So this is an upgrade. For many years, some of these emerging markets have benefited from sort of back office business processing type work, but now there's talk of more advanced global capability centers. And that is trying to take advantage of that talent in places like India and other countries, but bringing it more to the forefront of a global business because there's talent there. So I would say that's the opportunity to make sure that the benefits of AI are shared more widely, because there is a lot of talent and there's a lot of hunger to get involved in global supply chains, global businesses, and particularly AI opportunities from emerging markets.
It's really interesting because we always think about emerging markets as kind of the most vulnerable, but another kind of group that's been seen as vulnerable in the context of AI is young people and people just entering the job market. And many are attributing declining hiring levels or the fact that there's not that many graduate positions anymore, and just a general lack of investment in young talent due to this widespread deployment of AI, which is taking over the job of a lot of, for example, junior lawyers. And this feels fundamentally at odds with two of the Davos themes that people have been talking about, which is investing in people and deploying innovation responsibly. How can you have efficiency while still supporting young talent?
It's a wonderful question because it is a real problem. And just to take a sort of a holistic view, I think we have to work on both ends of the age spectrum, if I can be polite. There's been talk this week about the pressure on government budgets, fiscal space, particularly in sort of advanced economies. They're already under fiscal pressure. There could be and should be advances from AI in terms of health. So people could be living to 90 or 100, but there is no way that people can be retired from the age of 62 or 65 to 100. Our governments, our public systems can't support that. The question about young people is genuinely about training, education. Do we have the right training, education systems? And maybe we don't. We need to work out what that really is. And I think that's a huge challenge because AI is moving at such a pace. If you create a system right now about certain areas of knowledge or tasks or things that we train young people in, if AI systems can do that in 3, 4, or 5 years, it's a waste. So people are talking about interpersonal skills, communication skills, decision-making skills, creativity, critical thinking. That all makes sense to me, but I honestly think we also have to focus on the other end of the age spectrum because people may not be happy with this, but working into their, 60s, 70s and 80s because governments just can't support them. So I think one of the fundamental huge questions away from geopolitics is what AI is doing to our labour market, what that means for our schools, our education, our training systems, not just for young people, but for people right throughout the age spectrum.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's really interesting that you're linking the young people angle with the kind of retirement angle. So I think I never thought about it like that.
Exactly. I'm not saying I have the answers. Honestly, I think at Economist Impact, we have started to do some research in this space, and I really hope we can continue to do research in this space because it's a coming together of demographics, sort of economics and fiscal space, AI, jobs, labour market. And I think this is one of the biggest questions in the next 20 to 30 years, alongside geopolitics, alongside climate change. We have to work out, because if I can just share a personal view, I don't want to live in a world with 20, 30 or 40% unemployment. Some of the tech optimists talk about AI doing everything for us and we can just, sit on the Australian beach having our coffee and avocados and whatever. I don't want that. I actually don't want to live in a world of 20, 30, 40% unemployment. But how we stop that happening, or at least achieve a way of where we're having jobs and opportunities right across the age spectrum, that is one of the biggest, most fundamental questions of our time.
Absolutely. And I've got one last question for you, which is quite a meta kind of question. I think I was struck by your role, your job description, which is really interesting. It's head of new globalisation. And that made me think about, I studied politics at university. And one of the key ideas that we talk about when we talk about globalisation is that increasing trade makes everybody better off, right? It makes you more prosperous. It discourages conflict because everyone's trading with each other. And I think that lately we've been seeing the opposite. So trade is becoming almost a source of conflict. And there's this kind of discourse that trade is actually stealing our jobs and making everyone worse off. My question is, have we lost faith in globalisation? And if we have, what comes next?
Oh, absolutely. In a way, we have. Not me. I love trade. I'm a fan of globalization. I'm not saying it's perfect. But yes, we didn't quite get trade right over the last 10 to 20 years because even in our economic theories at university, there are winners and losers from trade. But there's an adjustment. When an economy opens to trade, overall, the benefits outweigh the losses, but there will be some losses. And we didn't, maybe with hindsight, we didn't do enough to deal with those who suffer from dislocations in certain geographical areas and loss of jobs and so on. So in a way, yes, we have lost trust in global trade. But the reason why we've started this Future of Trade initiative is because we believe the alternative of a world without rules is chaos. As I said, if we continue going down this fragmented path, we're all going to lose. So one of the biggest challenges we have, and with all my colleagues at Economist Impact, we have a lot of work to do here, but right now a zero-sum approach to the world seems to be dominating, and that's basically winner takes all. And that's not the world I think we should be living in. That's the dominant theme we seem to have right now. But that's a choice. We don't have to make that choice. And what we're hoping with the initiative, with our partners, we have a UN agency, the UN Conference on Trade and Development joining us, and hopefully many other partners. We want to make a different choice, which is a choice where we try to realize those shared and mutual benefits of global trade. That's a choice we want to make.
Thank you. And I think that's a really hopeful way to end this podcast. So thank you for joining us, John.
Thank you so much for having me.